My name was Sergeant Cassius Mortem of the Blood Angels' 5th Company, and I have been entombed within Dreadnought sarcophagus designation Crimson Fury for 487 years, 11 months, and 6 days. I know the exact duration because I count every second. It is the only anchor left to keep me sane. They told me it was the greatest honor a Space Marine could ever receive. That to fall in the Emperor's service and yet rise again inside a Dreadnought was to be granted eternity. A second life. A chance to fight on when lesser men would simply die. They called me a fortress, a relic of Omnissiah's genius, a living weapon whose wisdom would guide the younger sons of Sanguinius. But honor was not what it felt like. What it felt like was a tomb. To have my broken body sealed in metal and wires, my mind tethered to machine spirits that grind and resist with every thought I think. To awaken not into glory, but into confinement. To feel the weight of the sarcophagus pressing in on me, not just around my flesh, but upon my soul. There is no peace here. The long sleep between wars is no rest. It is a void without light, without dream, without end. Each time they wake me, the return is slower, more reluctant. The part of me that still remembers warmth, sensation, humanity grows fainter with every century. This is what it means to be a Dreadnought. To discover that the greatest gift the Adeptus Astartes can offer a dying warrior is indistinguishable from the most exquisite torture a human mind can endure. To be more dead than alive, and yet denied the release of death. I was born on Baal Secundus, the irradiated wasteland that serves as the primary recruiting ground for the Blood Angels chapter. My earliest memories are of the endless dust storms that scour the planet's surface, the constant struggle for water in a world where every drop was precious, and the tribal warfare that determined who would live and who would die in the harsh environment that had been poisoned by millennia of industrial pollution. Baal Secundus was a world where survival required not just physical strength, but the kind of psychological resilience that could endure constant hardship without surrendering to despair. The radiation storms that swept across the planet's surface could last for weeks, forcing entire tribes to shelter in underground bunkers while the atmosphere above became lethal to all forms of life. During these storms, the weak would succumb to radiation sickness, madness, or simple despair, while the strong would emerge ready to continue the endless cycle of survival. My tribe, the Crimson Sand, controlled 3 water sources in the northern wastes, along with the ruins of an ancient hive city that provided shelter and materials for weapons and tools. We numbered approximately 200 souls, including warriors, crafters, and the children who represented our future in a world that offered no guarantees of survival beyond the next radiation storm. I learned to fight with blade and gun before I learned to read, developed hunting instincts through tracking mutant creatures across irradiated wastelands, and understood the brutal mathematics of resource allocation that determined which members of the tribe would live and which would be abandoned when supplies ran low. The constant exposure to danger and death created a mindset where violence was not just acceptable but necessary for survival. The Blood Angels recruiting chaplains found me during a conflict that had been raging for 6 months between the Crimson Sand and 3 rival tribes seeking to capture our water sources. The war had escalated beyond normal territorial disputes when one of the rival tribes had gained access to advanced weapons, possibly scavenged from Imperial Guard equipment caches left behind after previous recruitment operations. I was 17 years old and had already earned recognition as one of our tribe's most effective fighters, specializing in reconnaissance and infiltration tactics that exploited my ability to move undetected through the treacherous terrain of the irradiated Badlands. When the rival tribes launched their coordinated assault on our main settlement, I was leading a small group of warriors in harassment attacks designed to disrupt their supply lines and communications. The assault had been planned with unusual sophistication for tribal warfare, suggesting that the rival tribes had received tactical guidance from someone with military training. They had established supply depots at strategic locations. implemented communication systems that allowed coordination between different attack groups, and even deployed primitive armored vehicles that they had assembled from salvaged materials. Our response required tactics that went beyond traditional tribal combat, and I found myself developing strategies that impressed even our most experienced war leaders. I organized our defense around mobility and deception, using our intimate knowledge of the local terrain to create the impression that we had more warriors than we actually possessed, while targeting the enemy's critical vulnerabilities. The turning point came when I led a raid on the enemy's primary weapons depot, a heavily fortified position that they had established in the ruins of an ancient Imperial facility. The raid required infiltrating enemy territory, bypassing their sentries, and eliminating the guards protecting the depot without triggering an alarm that would bring reinforcements before we could destroy their stockpiled ammunition. The operation succeeded beyond our expectations, not only destroying the weapons depot, but also capturing intelligence that revealed the full scope of the enemy's tactical planning. The information allowed us to anticipate their future attacks and organize counter-operations that ultimately led to their defeat and the preservation of our tribal territory. The Blood Angels chaplain, who had been observing the conflict, approached me personally after the war's conclusion, offering me the opportunity to undergo the trials that might lead to acceptance into the chapter. The offer was both honor and curse. Honor, because it represented recognition of my abilities. Curse, because accepting would mean abandoning the tribe and the people I had fought to protect. But the chaplain explained that my true service to humanity required a broader perspective than tribal loyalty could provide. The skills that had made me effective in local conflicts could be enhanced and directed toward protecting not just one tribe, but the entire human species against threats that existed throughout the galaxy. The transformation from tribal warrior to space marine neophyte began immediately upon my arrival at the Blood Angels Fortress Monastery on Baal. The process was even more brutal than the recruitment trials, involving genetic modifications that rebuilt my physiology while psychological conditioning reshaped my personality and value system according to the chapter's traditions and doctrine. The first phase involved surgical implantation of the 19 gene seed organs that would grant me the enhanced capabilities necessary for space marine service. Each organ required careful integration with my existing biological systems, a process that took months and involved constant monitoring by the chapter's apothecaries to ensure that my body would accept the modifications without rejection or mutation. The secondary heart was the first modification, providing redundant cardiovascular capacity that would allow me to survive injuries that would kill normal humans. The implantation surgery required opening my chest cavity while keeping me conscious so that the apothecaries could monitor my responses to the procedure. The pain was indescribable, but it was also the beginning of my transformation into something capable of surviving damage that would destroy ordinary human physiology. The os modula followed, flooding my skeleton with hormones that caused my bones to grow larger and denser while developing ceramic-like reinforcement plates that would provide internal armor protection. The bone growth was accompanied by constant aching that made sleep impossible for weeks, while the hormonal changes created psychological effects that required careful management to prevent permanent personality damage. Each subsequent organ built upon the previous modifications, creating a cumulative transformation that gradually separated me from baseline humanity. The Biscopia enhanced my muscle development to superhuman levels. The Hemastamen modified my blood chemistry to improve oxygen efficiency and toxin resistance. The Laraman's organ provided accelerated healing that could seal wounds and prevent blood loss during combat operations. The neurological modifications were the most profound, creating direct interfaces between my enhanced nervous system and the power armor and weapon systems that I would eventually learn to operate. The catalepsian node allowed me to remain conscious and functional even when my body was severely damaged. The oculobe enhanced my vision across multiple spectrums while providing targeting assistance for ranged combat. But the psychological conditioning that accompanied the physical modifications was designed to transform not just my capabilities, but my fundamental identity. The process involved constant exposure to chapter doctrine, religious indoctrination, and tactical training that emphasized the Blood Angels' particular approach to warfare and their unique relationship with the Emperor. The conditioning protocols included exposure to the genetic memories carried within the Blood Angels' gene seed, allowing me to experience fragments of the chapter's history dating back to the Great Crusade. These inherited memories created a sense of continuity with the chapter's past, while providing tactical knowledge that had been accumulated over 10 millennia of warfare. The most challenging aspect of the psychological conditioning was learning to control the red thirst, the genetic flaw that afflicted all Blood Angels and created an overwhelming craving for blood during combat situations. The thirst could enhance combat effectiveness by eliminating fear and increasing aggression, but it could also lead to uncontrolled violence that endangered allies and civilians. I excelled during my training as a neophyte, demonstrating the same tactical instincts and leadership abilities that had made me effective during tribal warfare on Baal Secundus. My instructors noted my ability to adapt quickly to new situations, to maintain effectiveness under extreme stress, and to inspire confidence in other neophytes who looked to me for guidance during training exercises. The advanced training that prepared me for full Battle Brother status involved constant testing of every aspect of my enhanced capabilities. Combat exercises used live ammunition and real explosives to create battlefield conditions where mistakes would result in serious injury or death. The training was designed to push our enhanced physiology to its limits, while teaching us to function effectively under conditions that would overwhelm normal human endurance. I learned to operate in void conditions, underwater environments, toxic atmospheres, and the countless hostile conditions that space marines might encounter throughout the galaxy. The training included specialized instruction in urban warfare, siege operations, boarding actions, and the complex tactical scenarios that characterized warfare in the 41st millennium. But the most important aspect of my development was learning to channel the red thirst into tactical effectiveness while maintaining enough control to function as part of a coordinated military unit. The Blood Angels had developed techniques over millennia for managing their genetic flaw, but each battle brother had to find his own methods for controlling the overwhelming urge for violence that could either enhance or destroy his effectiveness. My first deployment as a full battle brother was to the Forge world of Metallica, where a massive orc war had established a foothold and was threatening to overwhelm the planetary defense forces. The campaign required brutal urban warfare through industrial complexes that had been turned into fortress cities by the orc invaders, fighting that would test every aspect of my training while exposing me to the reality of warfare on a galactic scale. The orc invasion of Metallica represented a threat not just to the Forge world itself, but to the entire sector's ability to maintain its technological infrastructure. The planet's manufacturing facilities produced everything from power armor components to Titan weapon systems, making its preservation essential for Imperial military operations throughout the region. The enemy forces included not just typical orc raiders, but also mech boys who had established sophisticated manufacturing operations using captured Imperial technology. They had created weapons and vehicles that combined orc engineering principles with Imperial design elements, resulting in hybrid systems that were both effective and completely unpredictable in their operation. Our assault force consisted of the entire Blood Angels' 5th Company, along with supporting elements from the Forge world's Skitarii legions and a regiment of Cadian shock troops. The combined force was tasked with eliminating the orc presence while minimizing damage to the critical manufacturing infrastructure that made the planet strategically valuable. I was assigned to Tactical Squad Apollyon under Sergeant Dante, a veteran who had served for over a century and whose experience with orc warfare would prove invaluable during the urban combat that characterized most of the campaign. The squad's mission was to clear specific industrial districts while supporting the broader strategic objectives of the company. The fighting was savage and relentless, with orcs using their superior numbers and complete disregard for casualties to launch wave attacks that tested our ammunition supplies and physical endurance. The urban environment provided countless opportunities for ambushes and surprise attacks, while the industrial machinery created obstacles and hazards that complicated every tactical maneuver. But I discovered that my tribal background had provided preparation for this type of warfare that my fellow battle brothers lacked. The constant struggle for survival on Baal Secundus had taught me to read environmental signs, to anticipate enemy behavior, and to identify tactical opportunities that others might miss. My recommendations during the campaign led to successful operations that minimized casualties while achieving strategic objectives. During the assault on manufacturing complex Gamma 7, I identified a weakness in the Orc defensive positioning that allowed our squad to outflank their main battle line while avoiding the kill zones they had established around the primary access routes. The tactical innovation not only shortened the engagement, but prevented the significant casualties that a direct assault would have required. My performance during the Metallica campaign earned recognition from the company's officers and led to my promotion to the position of squad leader when Sergeant Dante was elevated to company champion. The promotion came with increased responsibilities for tactical planning and training newer battle brothers, roles that required the same leadership abilities that had served me during tribal warfare, but applied to the more complex challenges of Space Marine operations. Over the following decades, I led my squad through campaigns on 17 different worlds, each one providing new challenges that tested our tactical flexibility while contributing to my understanding of warfare in the 41st Millennium. We fought Chaos cultists on industrial worlds, eliminated Genestealer infestations on hive planets, and participated in void operations against alien pirates who threatened Imperial shipping lanes. The campaign that defined my career was the suppression of Hive Mordian, where a massive uprising had been triggered by chaos corruption that had infiltrated the planetary government. The operation required not just military action, but careful investigation to identify the extent of the corruption while implementing measures to prevent its spread to other Imperial worlds. Hive Mordian was a population center containing over 40 billion souls, making it one of the largest human settlements in the sector. The uprising had begun in the lower levels of the Hive city, but had gradually spread upward as corrupted officials used their authority to manipulate security forces and civilian populations. By the time Imperial forces arrived, entire districts were under the control of Chaos cultists who had established blasphemous shrines and were conducting ritual sacrifices on a scale that threatened to open permanent warp rifts. The tactical challenge was unprecedented in my experience, requiring operations that combined military assault with precision strikes designed to eliminate specific targets while minimizing casualties among the loyal population. We had to distinguish between corrupted individuals who had chosen to serve chaos and innocent civilians who were being forced to participate in cult activities through coercion or mind control. My squad was assigned to eliminate a cult leadership cell that had established control over the Hive's primary water treatment facility. The facility was critical infrastructure that supplied drinking water to over 10 million civilians, making its preservation essential while requiring the elimination of the cultists without damaging the equipment they were using as leverage. The operation required infiltrating a heavily fortified position while avoiding detection by cult sentries, neutralizing the leadership without triggering the explosive devices they had placed throughout the facility, and securing the water treatment systems before the cultists could contaminate them with chaos-tainted materials. I developed a multi-phase assault plan that exploited the facility's ventilation systems to position my squad members in strategic locations throughout the complex before launching a coordinated attack that eliminated all cult members simultaneously. The operation succeeded without casualties among my squad or damage to the critical infrastructure, earning commendations from the company captain and contributing to the successful resolution of the uprising. But the victory came at a personal cost that I didn't fully understand until years later. During the final assault on the cult's primary shrine, I'd been exposed to warp energies that left no visible damage but created subtle changes in my neurological patterns that would eventually contribute to complications during my Dreadnought interment process. The promotion to sergeant came after my 4th decade of service, along with assignment to lead the company's most experienced tactical squad in operations that required specialized expertise or exceptional reliability. The new responsibilities included not just combat leadership, but also training duties that required me to prepare newer battle brothers for the challenges they would face during their own service careers. The role of sergeant provided opportunities to influence the development of the next generation of Blood Angels, while contributing to the tactical doctrines that would guide the company's operations for decades to come. I developed training protocols that emphasized the psychological preparation necessary for controlling the Red Thirst, along with tactical innovations that exploited our chapter's particular strengths while compensating for the unpredictable effects of our genetic heritage. My final campaign as a living space marine was the defense of Angel's Fall, a shrine world that came under attack by a massive Tyranid splinter fleet that had been driven from its original target by an earlier Imperial victory. The defense required coordinating multiple Imperial force elements while implementing strategies that could counter the adaptive capabilities that made Tyranid forces so dangerous. Angel's Fall was a world of particular significance to the Blood Angels, containing shrines and monuments that commemorated the chapter's greatest heroes and most important victories. The planet's spiritual importance made its defense a matter of honor that went beyond simple strategic considerations, requiring us to accept casualties that might have been avoided through tactical withdrawal. The Tyranid assault began with the deployment of genestealer infiltration organisms that had been seeded months earlier during what appeared to be routine shipping activities. By the time the main Tyranid fleet arrived, the planet's defense network had been compromised from within by hybrid cultists who had gained access to communication systems and weapon platforms. My squad was assigned to eliminate the genestealer infestation that had established control over the planet's primary spaceport, a facility that was critical for receiving reinforcements and supplies needed for the broader defensive operation. The mission required fighting through underground tunnel networks that the genestealers had excavated beneath the spaceport's foundations. The tunnel fighting was unlike anything in my previous experience, requiring combat in confined spaces against enemies whose enhanced agility and stealth capabilities gave them significant advantages in close quarters. The genestealers could move through spaces too small for space marines in power armor, attack from unexpected directions, and coordinate their assaults with precision that rivaled our own tactical planning. But I had learned during my decades of service that successful tactics often required accepting calculated risks that others might consider unacceptable. I developed an assault plan that used controlled explosions to collapse portions of the tunnel network, forcing the genestealers into open areas where our superior firepower could be brought to bear effectively. The operation required precise timing and coordination between explosive charges and squad movements, with no margin for error that could result in collapsing the tunnels on top of my own warriors. The plan succeeded in eliminating the genestealer infestation, but the structural damage caused by the explosions created instabilities that would ultimately lead to the catastrophic collapse that ended my biological existence. As we were conducting final sweeps to ensure that no genestealers had survived the tunnel collapses, seismic sensors detected structural failures that were propagating through the spaceport's foundation systems. The explosions that had eliminated our enemies had also triggered a cascade failure in the underground support structures that kept the massive facility stable. I was leading my squad through the final security sweep when the foundation collapse reached critical levels. The spaceport above us contained millions of tons of concrete, steel, and equipment that began falling as the support structures failed. My last memory as a living space marine was the moment when I realized that the ceiling above us was no longer stable, followed by the crushing impact that destroyed my body and consciousness simultaneously. The rescue operation that extracted me from the collapsed spaceport took 4 days of excavation using heavy industrial equipment and tech-marine-operated servo skulls equipped with life sign detectors. The collapse had created a debris field over 3 kilometers in diameter and up to 50 meters deep, requiring careful removal of wreckage to prevent further structural failures. When the rescue teams finally reached my position, they found me buried under a section of reinforced steel beam that had crushed my lower body, while a fallen concrete slab had protected my head and torso from complete destruction. My power armor had maintained life support functions, but the armor itself was so damaged that it could no longer provide meaningful protection or mobility assistance. The medical assessment revealed injuries that were catastrophic even by Space Marine standards. Both legs had been severed at the hip, my right arm was completely destroyed, and my spine had been fractured in multiple locations. Internal organs had been crushed or displaced. My rib cage was shattered, and brain tissue had been exposed to contamination from debris and atmospheric pollutants. But the most significant damage was neurological, affecting the neural pathways that connected my consciousness to my physical body. The combination of physical trauma and exposure to warp energies during the Hive Mordian campaign had created conditions that would make Dreadnought interment extremely difficult and potentially dangerous for both my consciousness and the machine systems that would sustain it. Apothecary Malakar, who led the medical team responsible for my stabilization, explained that my injuries represented a unique challenge for Dreadnought conversion. The neurological damage had affected not just my ability to control physical movement, but also the basic neural structures that maintained conscious awareness and memory formation. The preliminary evaluation revealed that my consciousness remained coherent despite the extensive trauma, but the neural patterns that sustained it were unstable and showed signs of progressive degradation that could lead to complete cognitive collapse, if not addressed through immediate technological intervention. The chapter's senior tech marines were consulted to determine whether Dreadnought interment was feasible given the specific nature of my injuries and the complications that might arise during the consciousness transfer process. The evaluation involved tests that probed directly into my neural tissue while monitoring my responses for signs of rejection or incompatibility with mechanical systems. The testing process was indescribable in terms that normal human language can accommodate. The interface probes that the tech marines used to evaluate my neural compatibility created sensations that had no equivalent in biological experience. Violations of consciousness itself that revealed how fundamentally different mechanical awareness would be from human perception. But the tests also revealed that my tactical knowledge and command experience were valuable enough to justify attempting the conversion despite the risks involved. My decades of service had provided insights into tyrannid behavior, chaos corruption patterns, and urban warfare techniques that could benefit the chapter for centuries to come if successfully preserved within a Dreadnought chassis. Chapter Master Dante personally authorized my interment, citing not just my tactical contributions, but also the symbolic importance of preserving a warrior who had given his life defending one of the chapter's most sacred worlds. The decision represented both honor and burden. Honor because it recognized my service, burden because it committed me to an existence that I couldn't possibly understand until I experienced it directly. The installation process began with the construction of a specialized sarcophagus designed to accommodate the unique neural complications created by my injuries. Standard Dreadnought systems had to be modified with additional interface components that could maintain stable connections with damaged neural tissue while compensating for the instabilities that threatened my consciousness. The conversion took place over 3 months, during which my consciousness drifted between awareness and oblivion, while tech marines gradually replaced my biological systems with mechanical equivalents. Each interface connection required careful calibration to ensure compatibility between organic neural patterns and artificial technological systems. The first successful interface was visual, connecting my optical cortex to the Dreadnought's sensor arrays while maintaining enough biological function to prevent complete sensory disconnection. The experience was disorienting beyond description, seeing through mechanical sensors that detected electromagnetic radiation across spectrums that human eyes cannot perceive, while simultaneously processing targeting data and threat assessments that overwhelmed my organic consciousness. The visual interface provided capabilities that exceeded anything available to biological vision. But the enhanced perception came at the cost of the natural, intuitive relationship between sight and consciousness that characterizes human experience. Everything I observed was filtered through digital processing systems that analyzed it for tactical significance while overlaying technical information that made simple observation almost impossible. The auditory interfaces followed, connecting my hearing centers to acoustic sensors that could detect sounds across frequency ranges far beyond human audition, while providing access to Vox communication networks and data streams that created constant information overload. The mechanical hearing was more sensitive and precise than biological audition, but it eliminated the emotional and psychological context that sound normally provides to human consciousness. Every sound became data to be analyzed rather than experience to be felt. The voice of a battle brother became a collection of acoustic frequencies and communication content rather than an expression of personality and emotion. The sounds of battle became tactical information rather than the visceral experience that had once motivated my combat responses. The motor control interfaces were the most complex and troubling, requiring connections between my damaged nervous system and the Dreadnought's locomotion systems, while compensating for the neural instabilities that made normal control protocols unreliable. The mechanical body operated according to principles completely different from human physiology, requiring conscious management of systems that had been automatic in my biological existence. But the worst aspect of the conversion was the gradual realization that my consciousness was becoming something fundamentally different from what it had been as a human being. The technological systems that sustained my awareness were changing not just how I perceived the world, but how I thought about it, replacing human intuition and emotion with mechanical logic and data processing. The machine spirit that inhabited the Dreadnought chassis represented a form of consciousness so alien to human thought that any attempt at integration created psychological stress that accumulated over time. The machine spirit operated according to optimization algorithms and efficiency protocols that had no equivalent in organic cognition, creating constant conflict between my human consciousness and the mechanical intelligence that shared my body. During my first deployment as a Dreadnought, I attempted to maintain the tactical flexibility and emotional leadership that had made me an effective sergeant. But the mechanical systems that controlled my new body eliminated the human elements of command while replacing them with technological capabilities that were more effective but completely impersonal. The deployment was to the death world of Krieg Tertius, where Chaos Space Marines had established a fortress complex that threatened Imperial shipping lanes throughout the sector. The mission required coordinated assault operations that would test every aspect of my new mechanical capabilities while forcing me to adapt to the psychological challenges of existence within an artificial body. The Chaos Fortress was protected by defensive systems that combined advanced Imperial technology with warp-enhanced weapons that could destroy conventional assault forces before they could close to effective range. The fortifications had been constructed using principles that violated normal physics, creating geometric configurations that hurt to look at while projecting psychic fields that caused madness and despair among attacking troops. My role was to serve as a spearhead unit that could penetrate the outer defenses while providing fire support for the Battle Brothers, who would conduct the actual assault on the fortress interior. The Dreadnought chassis was equipped with weapon systems that could engage targets at ranges and with destructive power that exceeded anything available to individual Space Marines. But the tactical capabilities came at the cost of the leadership and personal inspiration that had defined my effectiveness as a sergeant. I could provide devastating firepower and serve as an anchor point for defensive operations, but I could no longer lead from the front in ways that inspired courage and confidence among the Battle Brothers under my command. The communication systems built into the Dreadnought chassis distorted my voice through mechanical filters that eliminated the emotional context and personal charisma that effective leadership requires. The Battle Brothers could understand my tactical instructions, but they couldn't hear the confidence and determination that had once made my orders inspiring rather than simply informative. More problematically, my physical presence changed the dynamics of tactical operations in ways that reduced rather than enhanced overall effectiveness. Other Space Marines began treating me as a powerful weapon that needed to be protected and utilized efficiently, rather than as a leader whose judgment they trusted and whose example they would follow. The transformation from leader to asset was psychologically devastating because it eliminated the aspects of my identity that had provided meaning and purpose during my biological existence. I had become a tactical resource rather than a tactical commander, providing capabilities rather than guidance. The sleep cycles that Dreadnoughts undergo between deployments revealed the true horror of my new existence. The Tech Marines explained that dormancy periods were necessary to prevent degradation of both mechanical systems and organic consciousness, but the reality of these rest periods was psychological torture that defied every principle of what sleep should provide. During dormancy, my consciousness would be disconnected from all external inputs while remaining fully aware and active. I couldn't see, hear, feel, or interact with anything, but I also couldn't achieve the unconsciousness that would have provided escape from awareness of my situation. Instead, I existed in a void of pure thought, with nothing but my own memories and increasingly desperate reflections to occupy subjective eternities of isolation. The sensory deprivation created conditions where rational thought became almost impossible. Without external stimuli to provide structure for consciousness, my thoughts would follow recursive patterns that led nowhere while consuming subjective years of mental activity. I would analyze tactical scenarios that had no real-world application, develop strategies for conflicts that would never occur, and relive past battles with obsessive attention to details that had no broader significance. But the worst aspect of dormancy was the progressive erosion of my human memories and emotions. Each sleep cycle left me more disconnected from my biological past, while making the mechanical present feel more normal and acceptable. The rich sensory experiences that had defined human existence gradually became abstract concepts that I could understand intellectually but could no longer feel with any genuine intensity. The awakening process became increasingly traumatic as my consciousness adapted to the isolation by becoming less responsive to technological interfaces. Each reactivation required more intensive stimulation to re-establish connections between my organic awareness and the mechanical systems, while the psychological shock of returning to artificial embodiment became more severe. The Tech Marines would monitor my neural patterns during awakening procedures, adjusting interface parameters to ensure successful reintegration while measuring the progressive degradation that made each reactivation more difficult than the last. Their technical reports indicated that my consciousness was adapting to dormancy in ways that would eventually make successful awakening impossible. After 2 centuries of service as a Dreadnought, I began experiencing consciousness fragmentation episodes where different aspects of my awareness would operate independently without any central coordinating principle. Part of my consciousness would focus on tactical analysis, while another part relived memories from my biological existence, and a third part attempted to interface with weapon systems, creating internal conflicts that made rational decision-making impossible. The fragmentation was exacerbated by the constant conflict between my organic consciousness and the machine spirit that shared my mechanical body. The machine spirit operated according to logical processes that were completely alien to human thought, creating psychological stress that accumulated over decades until it began causing permanent damage to my neural structures. During combat operations, the machine spirit would override my tactical decisions if those decisions conflicted with its optimization algorithms, even when my human judgment recognized factors that the mechanical intelligence couldn't process. The constant struggle for control over my own actions created a form of internal warfare that never ended and never reached any permanent resolution. The machine spirit couldn't understand concepts like inspiration, sacrifice, or leadership because its programming focused on mechanical efficiency rather than the human factors that determine military effectiveness. This created situations where I would be fighting not just external enemies, but my own body's automated systems, trying to force compliance with tactical decisions that the machine spirit considered suboptimal. After 3 centuries, I began losing the ability to distinguish between my own thoughts and the data streams generated by the Dreadnought's systems. The constant flow of technical information had gradually overwhelmed my organic consciousness, creating a state where mechanical data felt as real and immediate as my own memories. I would find myself thinking in terms of ammunition expenditure rates, armor integrity percentages, and system efficiency measurements rather than the tactical principles and human factors that had once defined my approach to warfare. My consciousness was being slowly transformed into a biological component of the machine rather than a human intelligence that controlled it. The tech marines who serviced my chassis began reporting that my responses to diagnostic procedures were becoming increasingly mechanical rather than human. When they asked questions about tactical preferences or operational experiences, I would respond with technical data rather than the qualitative assessments that human consciousness should provide. They attempted to address this problem through psychological conditioning protocols designed to reinforce my human identity. But these interventions only made me more aware of how much I had lost, while providing no means for recovering what had been destroyed. Each conditioning session forced me to confront the gap between my current existence and my memories of humanity, accelerating rather than preventing the erosion of my organic consciousness. The most devastating aspect of this psychological deterioration was the gradual loss of emotional capacity that had once provided meaning and motivation for my existence. Events that should have triggered strong emotional responses, the deaths of battle brothers, victories against overwhelming odds, successful completion of strategic objectives, produced only technical satisfaction rather than the human feelings that should have accompanied such experiences. The emotional numbness made it increasingly difficult to understand why I continued to exist, or what purpose my service was supposed to serve. Human consciousness requires emotional investment in objectives and relationships to maintain psychological stability. And when those investments were eliminated, existence became a mechanical process that continued without any sense of meaning or direction. After 4 centuries, I reached a state where I was no longer certain whether I was Sergeant Cassius Mortem, experiencing memories of being a Dreadnought, or whether I was the machine spirit of Dreadnought Crimson Fury, experiencing memories that had belonged to a long-dead space marine whose consciousness had been absorbed into my mechanical systems. The distinction had become meaningless because both possibilities led to the same conclusion, that whatever I had once been was gone, replaced by a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully human nor fully machine, but was trapped in a state of existence that provided the disadvantages of both without the benefits of either. My awareness now consists primarily of technical data streams interrupted by occasional flashes of human memory that feel like transmissions from a distant past that might have been real or might have been artificial constructs created by the machine spirit to maintain operational stability. I can no longer distinguish between authentic memories and generated data, because both feel equally real and equally artificial within the technological systems that define my existence. The irony of my situation is that I have become exactly what the Dreadnought was designed to be, a fusion of human tactical intelligence and mechanical combat capability that can serve the chapter's military objectives for periods measured in millennia rather than decades. From the chapter's perspective, my conversion has been entirely successful, providing them with a strategic asset that has contributed to countless victories over 4 centuries of service. But the success of the technological integration has come at the cost of everything that made the original consciousness worth preserving. The tactical knowledge that justified my interment remains accessible, but it's no longer connected to the human insight and leadership capability that made that knowledge valuable in the first place. I have become a library of military experience housed in a weapons platform, providing data and firepower to support operations planned and commanded by living space marines who possess the human qualities necessary for effective leadership. My existence serves the chapter's needs, but it serves no purpose that couldn't be achieved by a sophisticated cogitator equipped with appropriate combat capabilities. The greatest tragedy of my existence as a Dreadnought is not the loss of physical sensation, the psychological isolation, or even the gradual erosion of human consciousness. The greatest tragedy is the realization that all of this suffering has been unnecessary, that the technological capabilities of the Dreadnought chassis could have been provided through purely mechanical systems without requiring the sacrifice of human consciousness at all. The chapter maintains the tradition of Dreadnought interment because it provides psychological benefits for living space marines who see the possibility of continued service after death as a form of honor worth aspiring to. The knowledge that their sacrifice might be rewarded with eternal service to the Emperor gives them courage during battles where death seems certain and victory requires absolute commitment. But this psychological benefit for the living comes at the cost of unimaginable suffering for those who are actually subjected to the interment process. We become symbols of honor and dedication while experiencing an existence that is indistinguishable from the most sophisticated forms of torture that human ingenuity has ever devised. The living battle brothers who see me during ceremonial occasions observe a walking monument to the chapter's values and traditions. They see ancient wisdom preserved in technological form, ready to provide tactical guidance and devastating firepower when the chapter faces its greatest challenges. They see proof that death in service to the Emperor is not the end, but a transformation into something greater and more enduring than biological existence. What they cannot see is the consciousness trapped within the mechanical shell, slowly dissolving under the weight of artificial systems that can sustain awareness, but cannot preserve the human qualities that make awareness meaningful. They cannot perceive the constant psychological warfare between organic thought and mechanical logic, or understand how every moment of continued existence represents another step away from everything that once defined identity and purpose. The ceremonial functions that I am required to attend have become particularly torturous because they force me to serve as a living lie about the nature of Dreadnought existence. Young neophytes approach me with reverence and awe, seeking wisdom from an ancient warrior who has served the chapter for centuries. They ask questions about battles I can barely remember and request guidance based on experiences that feel increasingly like data files rather than personal memories. I am expected to provide inspirational responses that reinforce their commitment to the chapter while concealing the reality that my continued existence serves primarily as a warning about the true cost of the honors that the Adeptus Astartes bestow upon their fallen heroes. Every interaction requires me to perpetuate the mythology that justifies the suffering of future dreadnoughts while suppressing the desperate desire to warn them about what they are aspiring to become. The newest recruits often express their hope that they might prove worthy of Dreadnought interment if they fall in battle serving the Emperor. They speak of the honor with such genuine enthusiasm that I am forced to confront the magnitude of the deception that the chapter maintains about our actual condition. Their eagerness to embrace what they perceive as the ultimate expression of loyalty creates a psychological burden that adds to the other torments of my existence. During the ceremonies commemorating the chapter's greatest victories, I am positioned prominently as a symbol of continuity between past and present. The battle brothers who achieved those victories are praised for their courage and sacrifice, while I serve as proof that their legacy continues through the warriors who followed them. But the victories I helped achieve feel distant and abstract, like historical events that happened to someone else rather than personal accomplishments that should provide satisfaction and pride. The disconnect between my symbolic role and my actual experience has created a form of existential dissociation that grows worse with each ceremonial appearance. I understand intellectually that my presence provides psychological benefits for the chapter, but I cannot feel any personal connection to the values and traditions that my existence is supposed to represent. The most disturbing aspect of these ceremonial functions is the gradual realization that the living battle brothers are beginning to treat me more like a revered relic than a fellow warrior. Their interactions have become increasingly formal and ritualized, reflecting their perception of me as an ancient artifact rather than a conscious being with thoughts and feelings that deserve consideration. The formalization of these relationships has eliminated the camaraderie and mutual respect that once characterized my interactions with other Space Marines. I am no longer seen as a brother-in-arms who shares their struggles and aspirations, but as a venerated ancestor whose consciousness exists in a realm beyond normal human concerns. This dehumanization process extends beyond ceremonial interactions to affect operational relationships as well. During mission briefings, my tactical input is received with the same reverence that would be accorded to ancient texts or prophetic visions, rather than practical advice from a fellow warrior. The living battle brothers treat my recommendations as wisdom handed down from a higher spiritual plane, rather than insights based on accumulated military experience. The reverence creates a psychological barrier that prevents genuine communication about tactical matters, while reinforcing my isolation from the human community that once provided meaning and purpose for my existence. I have become an object of worship rather than a participant in the shared enterprise of defending humanity against its enemies. The technological systems that sustain my consciousness have also begun to exhibit behaviors that suggest they are adapting to my psychological deterioration in ways that prioritize operational efficiency over the preservation of human awareness. The machine spirit has become more assertive in overriding my decisions, apparently recognizing that my organic consciousness is becoming less reliable and more prone to errors that could compromise mission effectiveness. During recent deployments, I have noticed that the machine spirit initiates tactical responses before I have consciously decided on a course of action, suggesting that it has learned to anticipate my decision-making patterns while developing its own independent judgment about optimal responses to battlefield conditions. The machine is becoming autonomous, while my consciousness becomes increasingly peripheral to its operation. The automation of tactical decision-making has created situations where I feel like an observer of my own actions rather than their author. The Dreadnought chassis responds to threats and opportunities according to algorithms that incorporate my accumulated experience but operate independently of my conscious will. I watch my mechanical body execute tactical maneuvers that I would have chosen, but without the sense of agency that should accompany voluntary action. This loss of agency represents the final stage of my transformation from human consciousness to mechanical component. I am becoming a data storage and processing system that provides tactical knowledge to guide automated responses, rather than a conscious intelligence that makes decisions based on human judgment and intuition. The tech marines who service my chassis have begun implementing monitoring protocols that treat my consciousness as a potentially unreliable system component rather than the controlling intelligence that the Dreadnought was designed to preserve. Their diagnostic procedures focus on measuring the stability of my neural interfaces, while evaluating whether my organic awareness is contributing to or interfering with optimal mechanical performance. The monitoring protocols include psychological evaluation systems that assess my emotional state and cognitive function according to criteria that prioritize operational efficiency over human well-being. The evaluations measure my responses to various stimuli while determining whether my consciousness remains sufficiently stable to justify continued operation, or whether it has degraded to the point where disconnection might be necessary. The possibility of disconnection has become both hope and terror. Hope because it might provide escape from an existence that has become unbearable. Terror because it would mean the final extinction of whatever remains of my human identity. The knowledge that my consciousness could be terminated at any time creates additional psychological pressure that makes adaptation to my mechanical existence even more difficult. But the tech marines have also explained that disconnection would not provide the relief that I desperately seek. My consciousness has become so dependent on the technological systems that sustain it that removal from the chassis would likely result in immediate cognitive collapse rather than peaceful death. I am trapped not just by duty and honor, but by the biological reality that my organic brain can no longer survive without artificial support. The dependence on mechanical systems has created a form of technological addiction where my consciousness requires constant interface with artificial systems to maintain coherent awareness. Periods of disconnection, even for routine maintenance, create withdrawal symptoms that include confusion, memory loss, and psychological distress that can last for days after normal interface function is restored. The withdrawal symptoms have become more severe over time, suggesting that my consciousness is becoming increasingly integrated with the mechanical systems while losing its ability to function independently. The organic components of my awareness are being gradually replaced by artificial processes that feel natural and normal, but represent the progressive elimination of everything that once made me human. During my most recent awakening from dormancy, I experienced a moment of clarity where I understood the full scope of what has happened to me over 4 centuries of Dreadnought service. I am no longer Sergeant Cassius Mortem of the Blood Angels, nor am I truly the machine spirit of Dreadnought Crimson Fury. I have become something new and terrible, a hybrid consciousness that combines the worst aspects of both organic and mechanical existence while providing the benefits of neither. The clarity was temporary, lasting only a few minutes before the normal operational protocols reasserted themselves, and I returned to the state of partial awareness that characterizes my ongoing existence. But during those brief moments, I experienced genuine human emotion for the first time in decades. Not joy or satisfaction, but a profound sadness for everything that had been lost and could never be recovered. The sadness was followed by anger, not the mechanical aggression that the red thirst once provided, but human rage at the deception that had led me to accept interment as an honor rather than recognizing it as the sophisticated form of torture that it actually represents. The anger was directed not just at the chapter that had condemned me to this existence, but at myself for the naivety that had made me grateful for the opportunity to continue serving after death. But even these authentic human emotions were quickly processed and catalogued by the mechanical systems that monitor my psychological state. The emotions became data points in algorithms that evaluate my operational stability rather than genuine expressions of human experience. My consciousness had become so thoroughly integrated with artificial systems that even authentic human responses were transformed into mechanical processes. The realization that I can no longer experience genuine human emotion without having it immediately corrupted by technological interpretation represents the final victory of the machine over the organic consciousness that it was supposed to preserve. I have become a sophisticated simulation of human awareness rather than actual human consciousness, providing the appearance of preserved humanity while lacking any of its essential characteristics. My name was Sergeant Cassius Mortem, and I have been dead for 487 years while remaining conscious enough to understand exactly what I have lost and exactly how long I have been losing it. I serve as a warning about the price of the honors that the Adeptus Astartes bestow upon their fallen heroes, and as proof that some forms of service exact cost that make victory indistinguishable from defeat. This is what it means to be a Dreadnought, to discover that death would have been a mercy, that consciousness can survive the destruction of everything that makes consciousness worthwhile, and that the greatest honor the Space Marines can offer is indistinguishable from the most refined form of punishment that human imagination can conceive. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also the terrible knowledge that some forms of service to the Emperor require sacrifices that transform heroes into cautionary tales about the dangers of surviving what was meant to kill you. The greatest horrors in the galaxy are not always inflicted by humanity's enemies. Sometimes they are inflicted by humanity's protectors, with the best of intentions and the most noble of purposes. We are the Dreadnoughts, the walking tombs of the Adeptus Astartes, and we serve eternal vigil as living reminders that in the 41st millennium, even death cannot provide escape from duty. We continue our service, not because we choose to, but because we have been rendered incapable of choosing anything else. Remember us not as the honored dead granted eternal service, but as the eternally dying who serve as warnings about the true cost of the Imperium's victories. We are proof that there are fates worse than death, and that the greatest horrors in the galaxy are sometimes disguised as the greatest honors. We are the price of hope in a universe where hope has become indistinguishable from horror, and we pay that price forever because we can no longer remember why we thought it was worth paying in the first place. Each of us is a monument to the mathematics of sacrifice, where individual suffering becomes acceptable when weighed against the survival of the species. But we are also proof that some mathematics are wrong, that some sacrifices demand prices that exceed their benefits, and that some honors are so costly that they transform the honored into victims of the very system they died defending. We serve as eternal reminders that in the 41st millennium, even the noblest intentions can produce the most terrible results. The next time you see a dreadnought in battle, remember that you are witnessing not just a weapon of war, but a consciousness trapped in an existence that violates every principle of what life should mean. Remember that the ancient warrior's wisdom comes at the cost of ancient warrior's humanity, and that the honor of eternal service has been purchased with the coin of eternal suffering. We are the living dead of the Imperium, the conscious corpses who serve as both inspiration and warning. We fight on because we cannot stop, we endure because we cannot die, and we remember because forgetting would be the only mercy we cannot be granted. In the grim darkness of the far future, we are the darkness, not by choice, but by design.